Hello, welcome to the Theology Pugcast. It's great to have you with us. I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor. I serve a church right outside Portland, Oregon, and I am a senior editor at Touchstone Magazine. How about you, Tom?
I'm Tom Price. I teach theology and Christian ethics at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and I minister here in Connecticut. Here for me in Connecticut.
Right. Glenn?
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a retired history professor, and I write a lot on Substack, and I'm working on several books.
Okay, well, let's jump into the theme of the day. And the theme of the day is, will the AI apocalypse create a leisure class that includes everybody? Basically, that's the idea. So the thing that inspired this subject today is in First Things, the February issue, there is a columnist named Leibovitz. Leibovitz at Large is the name of his column, and it's Liel, or Liel, I think it's Liel, Leibovitz, and he's clearly a rabbi. But anyway, he has a piece here entitled AI is Liberation. So he's taken an optimistic approach to the subject of everybody losing their jobs. So I want to read a little bit from it. It'll give us plenty to talk about, but basically, the gist of it in my mind is: can we really trust everybody to use their leisure time well and wisely, or will we end up with a world filled with Bertie Woosters who need AI to kind of be their Jeeves to keep them out of trouble? Anyway, that's the question. So he starts off, you can learn everything you need to know about our collective state of mind from the fact that the most talked about book of the year is titled, If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. Have you guys heard about that one yet?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Yeah. In fact, the guy who published it is Liel Leibovitz. And when I was at the Thiel lectures, the Antichrist lectures, Thiel was commiserating that he actually had funded that guy years ago and now can't stand him. But anyway, it says, he goes on to say, the it in question is advanced artificial intelligence. Although the book's authors, Liel Leibovitz and Nate Soares, present a serious and nuanced argument worth contemplating in full, their bottom line is simple enough. The machines, they argue, have reached the point at which, like anything flirting with cognition, they wish to maximize their performance. Sooner or later, this will mean eliminating those obtuse meat puppets, meaning us, that take way too long to complete basic computations and consume way too much electricity, namely all us paltry humans. So anyway, so that's the thesis of the book, the gist of the book. But Leibovitz is here to tell us that this is not something to worry about. In fact, this is actually something to look forward to. So he goes on to say a couple of paragraphs later, I'm sorry to spoil the pity party with a dose of old-fashioned optimism, but I feel compelled to note that everyone is not dying just yet. Good point. In fact, there are many reasons to believe that AI will usher in an era not only of great economic flourishing and innovation, but also of faith and spiritual growth. For more on the former, you can listen to Alex Karp. He's the guy over at Palantir, and he is a very interesting guy to listen to. But the latter, however, is trickier. What reason have we to believe that an abundance of AI will send us straight to church or to the synagogue? So anyway, that's the question that he's entertaining in this essay. Now, he segues from this opening, which is a fun opening, to a reflection on meritocracy. And so basically what he gets into it with this part of the essay is the fact that we've become basically a bunch of workaholics, because we're all trying to get into the best schools. We're all trying to get those six-figure jobs, and we're measuring ourselves against each other in this super competitive winner-take-all kind of world that we find ourselves in now. And that this is going to end because basically AI is going to put all those meritocrats out of business. Eventually, everybody's just going to have a lot more time in their hands, and they won't be able to measure their value by any of the metrics that people tend to measure their value by. So he thinks that this will drive people to, good old-fashioned things like religion. And that will include, a kind of flowering of interest in local communities, people getting to know each other better, and so on and so forth. Now, that's the gist of it. And you know what? I hope he's right, but I don't think he is. What this reminds me of that. And speaking of Jews, this reminds me of Fiddler on the Roof. Do you remember the song "If I Were a Rich Man"? Tevier in that song is talking about, wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to work? Right? He's a milkman, and he's wistful for this sort of this life that he imagines rich people have, in which he's just got all this time in his hands, and he can spend all day with the holy books and argue over the jots and the tittles in the holy books with other wealthy Jews. But he's fantasizing, and is that what would really happen, even in his case, Tevier's case? Anyway, this is the entree to the subject.
Well, a curious thing. Let's just say we're not in the AI world yet. Let's go back to a different time and take one aspect of the argument and see where we can go with it. And that is the notion: is can we be motivated to do things well? For other ends rather than the competitive and the meritocracy. And I do think there is some legitimacy there. Think of, for example, the way a lot of Christian academics happened most of history. It was for a different set of reasons and a different set of pursuits and values. I'm not saying there was never a competitive element there. I'm saying there was a high valuation on what was pursued, knowledge of God and all things relative to God, and the kind of the pious life, which included the intellect in its redemption. So there's motivation there to do those things, but there is also, I think, the other side. There's hard work involved in all of that, very hard work. You wouldn't be pursuing those things with the kind of rigor without that kind of, if you flooded it in with something else to do the work for you, right?
Right.
And so that was kind of, that's an interesting thing. So on one hand, I may agree that you can get the competitive, because I do think competitiveness can sometimes crush good, like in the academic world, good work.
Right.
But on the flip side, not having something to motivate the work and having to do the work, that's another problem.
Yeah, I think that's right. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I think your analogy to Tevye is very good. Because if Leibovitz is a rabbi, as you suggest, it strikes me the idea that if people had leisure, they would spend their time with the holy books is actually maybe a very Jewish way of looking at things.
Yeah.
And that, because studies of the Torah are considered the highest thing you can possibly do.
Oh, that's
leisure, absolutely, they're going to do this, but I'm not quite so sure that that's how it works with everybody else.
Yeah, that's right. So even if we were to think about, in Tom's illustration of, the church fathers, or even if we were to think about, say, the monasticism, we're talking about a fairly small number of people percentage-wise.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
What I find is that when people are bored, they tend not to want to do deep dives into scholarship or theology.
Yeah,
that's not what they do. They lock themselves in the basement and play video games these days.
Right.
And they take drugs. They do all of these kinds of things. That's our experience. What bread and circuses did not produce a flowering of culture among the working classes of Rome.
Right.
That's right. And the academic work, even with the monks, the patristics, and rabbinic, is spiritual activity. It's immersed in a life of worship, devotion, and again, these high valuations. And work. Even though not everyone was involved in that was one of the things the Reformation tried to do, is bring everyone into that. And still, people may do that a bit more. But I think you're right, Glenn. You take away the kind of rigorous context of worship, doctrine, and life interwoven so thickly, and that being your motivation, and everyone's committed to it. And then you get everyone basically sitting around on their screens, scrolling with all that leisure time they have, because they're not motivated by any limits or any kind of pressures
Right.
to have to kind of, that serves as kind of, let's just say it naturalistically, the dopamine that has to be there to get you kick started to put energy into anything.
Well,
Yeah,
and
and
we can add to that the fact that what we're seeing. This isn't directly AI related, but what we're seeing is with the decline of marriage, that produces its own set of problems, because the thing that is most likely to get somebody out doing things productive is having a wife and kids to take care of.
yeah,
That,
that's a
that
really
that's just the way it is. And so we're seeing a decline in marriage. AI, pornography, all of these things are going to affect that.
mhm.
What's going to be the motivation for people to get out and do anything?
Yeah, I think that's kind of at the heart of my own critique of this piece as well. But you brought out earlier, Glenn, the fact that monks and nuns didn't just pray all day. They didn't just contemplate
That's
the scriptures and read all day. They were working, and not just and not just because it was a good spiritual exercise, but because they needed to grow food to eat and stuff like that. And so there was some necessity driving it.
But if you read Benedict, the motivation for the labora part of this, the labor part of it, was because God is a laborer and he made us to be laborers. We are supposed to be working because God works. It was a way of breaking down the cultural idea that work is something that's fit only for inferiors and slaves. So it's to teach humility, but it's also work is considered a sacred calling because God gave Adam and Eve jobs in the garden before the fall. God is described as having ceasing from his labors, which means he labored.
Yeah, it's part of the image of God in us.
Well, and that gets at the heart of this question. Is it possible for us to really flourish without work? Because what he's entertaining is a kind of leisure that we associate with the leisure class, who don't have anything that is driving them by necessity. So I agree with your point, Glenn, about the elevation of work and the fact that it's a reflection of God's pattern. But they also needed to eat. And I think that
side too,
the practical side often is the thing that kind of gets you out of your lethargy, where you're just sitting there maybe saying, well, should I go to work or shouldn't I go to work? The fact that you need to pay the bills or whatever.
Well, I think for them, I mean, the visionaries of this stuff is that the food and the general necessities are going to be taken care of by the developments in technology, the farming and everything else, the farm pickers, the farm hands, robots doing the work.
DoorDash is going to be automated.
Yes. So
everything.
Yeah. So for them, you can, but I think tied in that, looking at it is, I mean, those needs aren't going to go away. They think that technology is going to become, total in that way. So there's nothing left for us to have to do in order both to sustain whatever we needed to be sustained and it have a general basic. I think they're going to have to, in their mindset, they're going to have to revision everything. Economies.
That's what they're talking about. Sure. And that, UBI and all that. We've talked about that before. I'm of the conviction that the theological, of course, is the sort of the most significant, and serves as a kind of umbrella for everything else. Yeah. But at the same time, I do believe that necessity, particularly as it relates to productive activity, is not something that we should dismiss as sort of incidental, but just actually part of the kind of the fabric of things as God intended things to be and to work according to. So, the point you brought up here a minute ago, Glenn, about marriage, I think is worth considering in relationship to this, because I think there was a point back during the Industrial Revolution when the households began to empty out because its most productive member, the father, went someplace else to work. And then eventually the wife left as well. And then you ended up with this place where you just go to recreate at the end of the day. And everything got reduced to psychological categories and needs rather than just practical needs. So I can't. I know some psychologists were concerned about this in the early 20th century, but they believed that, well, now that we don't really need each other anymore, now we can focus on emotional satisfaction. And what's developed is a kind of, well, a kind of situation in which that emotional satisfaction can't ever be satiated, for one thing, because it just continues to grow and grow, and then it's easy to dismiss somebody as being sort of someone you've outgrown, if that's the way that people like to put it, because your needs have changed, your emotional needs have changed. Whereas back in the 19th and 18th and earlier centuries, you didn't never go there because you didn't say, well, I don't need my husband anymore because he's not meeting my emotional needs.
Yeah.
Because he was meeting every other need. In other words, he was bringing in the food. He was doing the things that needed to be done to deal with, people trying to steal your stuff. There were all these things, all these practical things that, say, a wife would rely upon. You could reverse the argument. There were all these things that a man relied on his wife for, that just provided a baseline of reality so that you couldn't take flights of fancy and just follow those flights of fancy out the door. And so this is what I'm getting at with regard to just sort of our daily lives and work in general. Will we all become Leonardo? Will we all become Renaissance people or men and women? Or will we all become what you were describing, Glenn, people who just kind of devolve into some kind of a consumption node for video games and drugs?
Well, I mean,
my bet is on the second. There will be some people who will rise to the occasion, but my bet will be the second.
Yeah.
And there are those aspects we mentioned before that are central to our, being human, that these kind of things are going to have consequences that do us in certain kinds of ways. That's built into the fabric. And so having certain endowments of which actualization of certain realities, which we call work, right? Taking something and making it happen, and being a part of that is good for the realization of our natures to be human in certain ways. So it's going to take something away from something essential about us. It's sort of like similar with, being stuck in an earlier developmental phase, right? There are certain aspects that are meant to actually grow and be developed. If you get stuck here, something's missing the rest of your life. Well, something's going to be fundamentally, you already mentioned, in relationships, something already is fundamentally missing. Our capacity to do things that should be natural to us the right way. But the other thing is that because we aren't in a situation in which redemption has reached its fullness, that comes with the event of the eschaton, with Christ's return and perfecting of all things, then work still has a place in sanctification and limiting us in certain ways. It's meant to still cause sweat and cause frustration. And if you take that away, not just wasting time and laziness, but vice times a million is going to impact it's not going to be liberation as this also thing. It's going to be enslavement in ways that we would have wished we didn't throw the gospel out the door with it. And I think this is something, you've talked a lot about the transhumanism. Augustine was onto this with the Stoics, because what he admired was, of course, a commitment to kind of cultivating good. But what he realized is this kind of natural attempt not to recognize, as you meant, our neediness in the right kind of way. that were self-sufficient in the wrong kind of way was what he thought of basically as a type of transhuman, a type of ability to perfect yourself just through your own natural endowments. And in this way, this is an attempt to get utopia and the Sabbath through kind of technological development rather than eschatology.
Yeah, that connection you made to the Sabbath is really good. I'd like to follow up on that in a minute. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that occur to me here too, because if you read Genesis, we're made to work.
Yeah.
And if you eliminate that, you're eliminating something that's essential to human identity. Mm-hmm. And along with that, I was thinking about a conversation I had several years ago with a couple of women about the idea of women entering the workforce and doing all the jobs men are doing. And they didn't see a problem with this. Now, of course, they're not doing all the jobs. They're not your carpenters and things like that. But they didn't see a problem with that. And I couldn't quite communicate this at the time. But I think one of the things that really defines the male psyche is what do you do? What do you contribute?
Right.
And if women are doing everything men are doing, what is the point of being men? What's left?
Right.
And so this idea of what you do, it's part of what the image of God is for both men and women. But so much of particularly male identity is tied up in what you're doing, what you're contributing, your job, your work, your whatever. I don't think AI taking that away is going to be psychologically healthy.
Oh, I agree. And this brings kind of an ancillary thing, but Helen Andrews has been addressing this whole matter in a really, I think, a refreshing way, in the sense that she's noted that the feminine has sort of the feminine influence in social institutions has brought about certain problems that people probably would have foreseen years ago, but because of the kind of the miasma of egalitarianism, we can't even recognize, even though they're right in front of us. Now, getting back to your point, though, Tom, about the Sabbath, which is something that we really should think of as connected to leisure, understood in the correct way. By the way, I brought my copy of Leisure, the Basis of Culture.
Yeah, that's right.
Joseph Pieper, who makes that connection. Yeah. But if we think about the Sabbath, of course, the Sabbath is something that is celebrated or enjoyed every 7 days, right? It's not like every day.
That's right.
There's a work and rest kind of dynamic, right?
Yeah.
And so what we've done is, I think in part, because we've more or less associated, and this gets to your point, Glenn, earlier, we've more or less associated work with the curse, rather than a calling that was enjoyed before the curse. So there's something about kind of an inability to make a good distinction between, the kind of the effects of the curse making work more difficult.
Yeah.
And what work was intended to be from the start. And the fact that what we're essentially presenting ourselves with is basically obsolescence and losing a very important feature of the work-leisure dynamic in favor of just leisure, and that doesn't seem like it's going to end very well.
Yeah, it's similar. It's similar by analogy to what you could call kind of cheap grace, in the sense that you're calling it kind of cheap leisure, because leisure, as Pieper is getting a hold of it, and as Christians are talking about it, is really talking about the way in which grace in Christ communicates a break of the notion of work as an idol, and recognizing what the Sabbath was meant to, a limit to it. It isn't ultimate, and therefore it isn't going to be. It's not. Your relationship to it changes with grace. And so there is a foretasting of rest in work that we do, because we're not trying to do what we were trying to do with work prior to grace, right? Achieve something or build a tower to Babel, or only deal with the judgment side of it. And so leisure at the heart, it's just like culture. There are moments at which we need to celebrate and have, festivities and things like that. But if everything is a party and a festivity, right, it basically distorts the character of what true leisure and true Sabbath is all about. And even, a lot of theologians have talked about, even in the state of rest and Sabbath, that isn't a pure passivity. Again, it's a kind of activity that is enjoying what we do in a way that kind of work that is having to earn or kind of work through the sweat and brow doesn't. So those things shouldn't be looked at so differently. And I think what they do is they flatten it out, and leisure just becomes sort of it becomes sort of like what you call cheap grace that doesn't have any kind of life-giving fruit that comes with it.
So let me return to this article, because you brought up something that I think should be noted in his article. So to give Leibovitz credit, he's kind of getting at this a little bit. Oh. So at one point, when he's getting into this meritocracy and a critique of it, he quotes from a work by a British sociologist named Michael Young. And Young notes, and this is a quotation from Young's book. Let me see, what was the name of that book? I'm not seeing it here, but anyway, so many members of the merit certificate elite, Young mused, came from homes in which there was no tradition of culture. Their parents, without good education themselves, were not able to augment the influence exercised by the teacher. These clever people were, in a sense, only half-educated, in school but not home. When they graduated, they had not the same self-assurance as those who had the support and stimulus of their families from the beginning. They were often driven by this lack of self-confidence to compulsive conformity, thus weakening the power of innovation, which it is one of the chief functions of the elite to wield. They were often intolerant, even more competitive in their striving for ascent than was necessary, and yet too cautious to succeed. Now, there's a lot really going on there in that paragraph, and there's a lot worth reflecting on. But he's more or less, I think, making a good case for leisure, but also kind of implying that it's going to be hopeless, because how many families are like that? Yeah. I mean, when you think about how many families are actually doing what he's describing. Yeah. Now, I can think of some, but they're pretty exceptional.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think that some people will use their leisure well. Yeah. And I don't mean to say that we're all going to end up in the basement with Glenn's sad fellow who's just playing video games all the time and taking drugs. But it requires a lot to cultivate the virtues necessary to be able to use your leisure well.
And AI is going to undermine that.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the thing that I don't think is taking into account. In order to develop excellence in anything, the Chinese phrase kung fu doesn't mean martial arts. Mm-hmm. It means a skill that has been developed with time and effort. Long time, lots of effort. So I've actually seen kung fu tea ceremonies. Okay, so. The fact
that's a very amusing image, Glenn.
I have weird movies in my mind.
That's right. You offer someone tea and you punch them.
No. There is it is an art that you develop to do the tea ceremony correctly. So there's kung fu and calligraphy.
All these things are just my imagination.
Actually, that one. Who was it? John Scott of Sarajevo was described by his biographers as having been stabbed to death by the pens of his students.
That's what came to mind.
yeah. I think most professors can relate to that. But the point is, AI shortcuts everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Where it is absolutely demolishing our attention span. It's absolutely demolishing our ability to focus. How do you develop Kung Fu in anything?
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's right. And so even though I agree with this citation by this British sociologist, and I get what Leibovitz is hopeful for,
Yeah.
my incredulity has more to do with just the fact that I know a lot of people who aren't upper class. And by the way, just because someone is upper class doesn't mean they wielded their leisure well, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
there's just this just never-ending sort of bottomless pit of sludge that the Epstein file is, and we just keep having just this slow sort of kind of a revelation or apocalypse as we learn more and more about what our elites are like when the camera's not running, and they're just awful. At least the people that we read about that kind of get into these reports about what's in this bottomless pit of a file.
Yeah.
But that's not even really news. I mean, we've always known that our elites are a mixed bunch. I mean, go back to Nero. I mean, it's just there's nothing new.
It's still sick seeing Chomsky on the airplane. You know?
Oh yeah, yeah. Just all these hypocrites. It's just man, it's so gross.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. And those people probably had really, a lot of people in their lives encouraging them to use their leisure time well, and their privilege as well.
You went to Epstein. I was thinking Bertie Wooster again.
Yeah, that's right.
Epstein is even worse. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what you have there is you what excuse do these people have? Anyway, and by the way, they're elites in the sense of the meritocracy. Many of them are people that embody that sort of meritorious sort of ideal.
Probably all of them, because Epstein wouldn't go for anybody who wasn't an elite.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other show, but it's just such a wild thing in my mind. It's like, who didn't this guy know? I mean, it's just like, what was it about him that allowed people to, that sort of provided the occasion for them to open the door? Oh, at last, Epstein is calling me. What did he provide other than illicit services and creepy stuff?
Connections to other people.
Probably, yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, but it is still one of those kind of. It's just one of those. It's it's like you say. It's the strange kind of novel that gets developed with a character like that you just don't think could really happen, and here it is, or it could happen, but here is a real episode of it.
No, I think that if we had read something about, if this was a work of fiction, we'd all say, man, that is so over the top. There's just no way that would ever happen.
The way, but here is that, I mean, right. and the again, it's especially because we've dealt with the academic world in one way or the other. And first of all, I mean, the first thing that the mask off with Chomsky, who irritates the daylights out of me.
I don't know anybody who's not irritated by Chomsky.
but when he was basically telling those who hadn't been vaccinated that they need to not be able to buy food. I mean, I was like, if you still quote this guy with any kind of seriousness, but just watching him on that flight was just a little schadenfreude. I mean, it was, everything they loathe and tell, about the kind of, the caricature they create of who they loathe in society. They are far more vile. I know this is a sidetrack, but anyway, but technology has helped us in some ways see what's going on.
Well, there is that. I mean, there is an upside to everything.
Yeah.
By the way, in connection with that, at one of the training things I was doing for Chuck Colson, I commented that the first rule of political invective is to accuse the other side of doing what you're doing.
Oh, that's right.
And Chuck looked rather shocked, and he looked at the guy next to him and said, he's right.
No, that's right.
So, basically that's kind of the way I view it at this point.
No, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Let me return to the article here because I would like to, allow Leibovitz to speak in his own voice and make his case for what he is hoping for. So, getting into the second half of the essay, what happens then? To hear Moshe Koppel tell it only good things. Writing recently in Tablet magazine, we were dealing with something out of Tablet that you brought us here, I think, a week or two back, Glenn. The Israeli computer scientist posed the question on everyone's mind: if automation hollows out jobs, what will people do all day that feels meaningful? Simple, he responded. They will do what humans have done since time immemorial, which is look to faith for answers and a sense of purpose. Now, I hope that's right. He goes on to say, religion, Koppel reminded us, works because it offers scheduled repetitions of doing what you said you'd do, even when you don't feel like it. End of quote. It's a commitment, not a preference, and it offers, quote, a class of goods that sits outside the market by design. That's true, end of quote. Mm-hmm. Like reading scripture, praying to God, and spending Saturday or Sunday with your friends and neighbors, your job, in other words, may be disrupted by some clever computer that can do it twice as well in half the time, but your relationship with your maker and with your community is something you alone can navigate. And only by showing up and being fully present. The boundary, Koppel concluded, protects the thing from the optimization pressure that dissolves it. To keep these things biblical for a moment, think of AI not as the flood, but as the dove, informing us that the deluge is over and it's now time to rebuild. For decades, we've been in a competitive frenzy of work that has scrubbed our existence of every trace of truth and beauty. We have measured out our lives with coffee spoons, obsessed with having just a little bit more money, more power, more respect. We asked only what we could do rather than what we should. We generated immense wealth and progress and then wondered why they brought with them so much misery. So, I think that's a marvelous set of things to hope for. But, I do believe in original sin. And,
and I think maybe I'm hearing him wrong, but what I hear is that he's actually thinking that this could be a way of getting the market forces out of those spaces that have destroyed things like family, church, and because they have.
Yeah.
And I do think there is a valid critique there. The question is, will AI be that kind of sacramental, medium? I don't think so. That's where, because I think it has the same desire to enter into all those territories that the market and consumerism has, and I don't see how you can vacate those territories so easily once it begins to, it spills over into the church. It spills over into our practices and our communications with each other. And this thing, it's you're not going to be able to kind of, Mennonite it out of the territory without causing other problems.
Yeah, he notes two things. One is boundaries. Yeah. So, in other words, you've got to be able to keep that stuff out. We already see that it's seeping in all over the place, in our churches, in our homes. But also this willingness to work at this. So he talks about applying ourselves to this work of recovery. But again, I can't help but make the case for the practical. I just think that it's all works together. In other words, if we were just to say, okay, we're not going to actually do anything, we're just going to sit in a circle and look at each other and share our feelings with each other. Well, maybe there is a certain group of people that would find that appealing, but I don't think I could ever, sort of be okay with that myself. And now you could say, well, what about doing things, but as a hobbyist? In other words, now we don't actually need to work. So we can all pursue our hobbies. So we can golf all day or make furniture or whatever. And that would be enough to kind of keep us in touch with the physical world and be of use to each other. But really, I just don't. And I'm just a little bit skeptical.
and AI powered workshops will make furniture better and faster than you will.
Sure, sure, and that's something to note, and I've given a lot of thought to that, but in this particular piece, he doesn't. I just don't see him attending to that. Maybe it's because he's a rabbi. I don't know.
Well, the other thing is that it assumes a culture that has a religious foundation.
Right.
So if you have a religious foundation, I mean, I think you could make an argument that if people didn't have to work, religion would grow in importance, and because they're already engaged. But we're dealing with a culture that is largely disengaged from any form of religion altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know that they're going to say, oh, what I really need is church.
Right. Now, maybe out of desperation, they'll say, I'll give it a try. But most churches, and I suspect many synagogues, don't demand very much. People tend to come to them with a set of, I guess, expectations that they'll be entertained, but maybe entertained spiritually.
But I think that's what his critique is, to get that market relationship out of our religion. And I think he sees AI as a way of doing it, because if it takes over those arenas, then this other arena of meaning, purpose, and the cultivation of that in our relationships. And I don't think he means I think he means a harder form of religion, one that is an act. It sounded like the way he's talking about it, with practices and meaningful ways in which family is reintegrated into faith, and faith into community, and other kinds of common goods that aren't simply driven around the market and productivity that way. But see, I think here the problem is why get work out of the picture? How about and maybe he just hasn't clarified. Maybe the way in which we start to allow, maybe AI is not going to go away unless we somehow manage to blow the demon out of existence. But the way in which we can place it in territories and regain territory and meaningful work in that territory, that's a different question. One that doesn't give work over to something else, but actually, like you said, culture, religion are very interconnected. I mean, read Dawson if you sure. question it. And the making of a chair are all interconnected. Having something else even make a great, good fit and beautiful chair isn't the same thing as what culture and our productivity, our craftsmanship is doing. And you're headed for humanity loss if that isn't a part of the puzzle of retrieving religion. So I think work has to be a part of, and I would say work is at the heart of true religion, and it can't be given over. That's
I agree.
My take. Yeah,
I agree. So anyway, let me go ahead and continue reading here. Give us some more things to respond to. So he goes on to say, the coming of very smart machines may be just the chance we need to start over. True, like all technological upheavals, this one will bring profound changes we can't even begin to predict. Not all of them rosy. But also, like all technological upheavals, this one offers us an opportunity to return to first principles and to ask ourselves what being human is all about. Now, I think that's exactly right. Problem is, I don't think many people have the resources intellectually or spiritually to provide a very good definition of what it means to be a human being anymore.
And even those who work at it, it's not easy to be able to carve out for people to understand it who don't have the basics in place. It's very hard.
And as you noted earlier, AI is not just simply going to sit on the side and just leave certain spheres of our lives unintruded upon.
And as distorted as it is, the way in which robots are working and the way they're creating little pets that look like real little dogs, trust me, the baby is coming. The robot baby is coming.
I believe you. I believe you. Yeah, there's a market for it out there.
Yeah. And Carl Trueman has got a new book coming out in April. And it's he's actually taking, in a sense, critiquing the disenchantment thesis. He's saying that disenchantment only goes so far. What we're really dealing with now is desecration.
Yeah, I think he's right.
And
I think he's right.
And he says the great battlefield theologically right now is anthropology.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And he says when you look at what is happening with desecration, what are the key things that there were rituals around in every culture? Childbirth, marriage, death.
Right.
All of these things are being systematically attacked.
Right.
And he said it is functionally, it is all about desecration.
Right.
And what you're describing here strikes me as there's a sense in which the idea that we can eliminate work from people's lives, that they don't need to ever do anything productive again, is in fact desecration.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, that's right. We ought to get Carl on. I'll see if I can reach out to him and get him on the show.
Yeah, I'm going to be one. I saw him yesterday. I'll be seeing him again next Thursday. I'll try to.
Oh yeah, why don't you? I'll just leave it with you to do that then, Glenn. I'll just
2 weeks. Excuse me, 2 weeks. But,
if you can get him on, that'd be great. Well, he's going to be needing to pitch a book. That's a perfect time to get it.
That's right. and that book's been, a lot of people, people have been writing about it in the academic side, but most people can't digest what's going on there. So this definitely has the advantage of being able to step closer into people's rooms and be able to get a hold of, for years, people have been saying, even figures during the neo-Orthodox movement, once the eclipse of God happens, the eclipse of humanity is next. And now that stage is up and running. This is where the panic button is hit, because now we're seeing technology have the ability to do this in ways that affect everybody.
And the thing that's been the most exasperating for me about some of these developments are the super enthusiasts in certain Christian circles for all the new stuff.
Yeah.
And they've never struck me, first of all, as people who have much kind of interest in anthropology, for example, biblically understood or theologically addressed. And I just, when I see these people just kind of in their sort of glowing enthusiasm for all this stuff, I wonder, when is the next time I'm going to see, at what point am I going to be, going to see you and I'm going to see some wire sticking out of your head? I mean, literally some wire sticking out of your head because you wanted to merge with the machine. And anyway, but getting back to this piece, AI copyrights can fetch sources and summon moves, but it cannot give you the reflex that keeps moral talk from devolving into sentiment. The machines, in other words, may take some of our jobs, but they could never satisfy our desire for justice, for compassion, for truth, for transcendence. Basic human instincts that have thrust us forward for millennia. We may lose some of the prestige that once came with being meritocratic high achievers, but we'll gain something more valuable in return, the gift of being fully present and realizing, as so many of our ancestors have, that we matter because we are created in God's image, not because we are on the receiving end of a gilded diploma or a padded paycheck. Now, I'm on board with all of the things that he's saying here.
Yeah.
My thought is, though, in terms of, say, for example, justice, compassion, truth, or transcendence. So let's just focus in on justice and compassion. Let's say we can live in a society of superabundance in which all of our needs are being addressed, our physical needs are being addressed by our artificial intelligence, externalized artificial intelligence in form of robots. Well, what we end up with in a situation like that is justice and compassion are suddenly downgraded. In other words, justice and compassion are things that have to do with the distribution of goods, right, in a society. Now, if everything is all taken care of for you, you don't really need to be compassionate toward anybody, because you can just kind of sniff at somebody and say, well, you don't have any needs. I mean, you get everything you want just like I do.
And then with justice, it becomes defaulted to technology resolving, because if you can have, quote unquote, the unbiased grok tell us whether this picture is genuine or not, right? tell you whether this is a just action or not.
Yeah, or just simply it serves as the new kind of expert, which
Yes, on everything.
is truly objective because it has no sort of emotional connections to anything or anybody.
Yeah,
Isn't that the thing that we're always complaining about? We're complaining about people from a different ethnic group favoring their own ethnic group and putting us at a disadvantage. Well, that's part of what it means to be a human being, is to actually have a sense of devotion and loyalty to your own people,
And those kind of, like Gadamer's whole point is that those kinds of what he calls the good bias and the bad bias, he talks about that a lot of those serve the foundation. Those biases serve good overall. You can't rid yourself of them, and to do that and think you're going to apply it in a way that's humane is simply not going to be the case.
But you see, and we're agreeing that this set of values that he hopes will be valorized by the fact that we no longer have to work for a living actually undermines the very things he's talking about. So, in other words, truth. Well, again, why would you give too much interest or care too much about that, unless you just have sort of like this strange kind of hobby of like reading works that address this in just an abstract way, So you see what I'm getting at.
But it even seems like it would just studying theology all day and the Bible all day or just good literature and everything else, because those are so rooted in the human and the humane as well, and those aspects, they're going to get radically redefined, if not evacuated as well. There isn't a point to them at some point, and I don't know how he.
Yeah, and how do you relate to like the vast, a repository of human literature that's all about stuff that you no longer have to deal with,
and the kind of experience. And then the other thing is the way this is something Scripture does teach us, is that we become like the idols we create, and so we will become more like the computer than humane, AI than not. It will become. We've made a reflection of ourselves in some sense, but we're going to become like it, like all idols always serve.
Yeah. Well, this brings up something that I've been thinking a lot about here recently, and it has to do with the hierarchy of being. This is a Platonic take, and I've worked it into my book on AI. But basically, when we think about what's ultimately real, there are ways to discuss that. One of those things, ways is, the self-existent is more real than the things that depend upon that thing to exist. So that's one way to talk about it. Another way to talk about, reality is things that don't change are more real than things that do. Things that come into existence and pass out of existence. So in this great scheme of things, the Platonic view is that, you have the forms and you have these unchanging things that everything else in some sense reflects, right? Now, in the Christian scheme, we have God and we have the image of God. We are God's image bearers, right? So what are about the things we make? So God makes us, God makes the world, and the things that he makes say some things about him, right? So our tools say things about us.
Yeah.
They're lower on this scale.
Yeah.
And this is what, of course, Plato is getting at.
Yeah, and there is that. I think that the healthy Christian way is to say the things we make in some sense, like I think Tolkien was onto, the things we make are reflections of us, but the things we make well are reflections of us as images of God.
That's right.
And so that's where we measure culture and artifact. Those things that refract us as image bearers of God versus those that become distortions of it, and therefore idols, and take on a whole different life of their own in many ways.
Yeah. So, when it comes to our works, the only works that will follow us are the works that glorify God.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah. It seems to me that the world that he is envisioning creates a pointless existence for the people who are in it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they can search for meaning, they can search for purpose, they can do all of those kinds of things, but fundamentally, they're not needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so your very existence is in this world, emphasize in this world, your very existence is simply pointless. It's meaningless. You do not contribute anything. You're not needed here. There's nothing. There's nothing for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that might be one of the things that might drive people to religion, but historically, that tends to drive you to other places.
Yeah. So I think, as we're wrapping things up, I think we've have this kind of dilemma because what he's describing is not something that he's proposing. In other words, what he's describing is a response to something that's just happening. In other words, and we're beginning to see it. I've been watching the stock market here recently, some of the effects of the kind of like, finally it's kind of like sinking in that AI is going to wipe out a lot of traditional software companies. And their stock valuations are tanking. Like just over the past 3 or 4 days, people are finally it's kind of sinking in, particularly with the stuff like Gemini that has basically products that can just do code, write code for people who have no idea what it means to write code. So you and I can create software tomorrow that serve a particular purpose in our lives just by using Gemini on a monthly sort of subscription basis. And suddenly, tons and tons of people that we know personally who made their living in software are obsolete. And this is like the first wave of this stuff. So I think I saw Oracle is laying off 30,000 people. Amazon just laid off another 15,000 in Seattle.
The music industry now. I mean, besides that generating music and creativity, that sound can mimic kind of certain kinds of artists, but what you call demo musicians, ones that you used to have to hire to send a demo in. Well, now the tech can do it. So those people are having to find, what's going to be the motivation to work hard? I mean, other than maybe just live music.
And so getting to this article, he's not to blame for what he's proposing. I think he's trying to be optimistic about the reality that we're facing, and he's trying to present us with a set of thoughts about maybe it's got an upside, and I hope it has an upside. But one of the things that we've discussed here is the ability or the sort of the need for us to create some boundaries for AI. And I think that's undeniable. But the question is, how do we create those boundaries? Where are the boundaries? Can we enforce those boundaries? Who does the enforcing? Is it the government? Is it just families? Is it churches? Is it local communities? How does that work? Because I don't think that we're going to have a world that we want to live in where AI doesn't keep its place or doesn't know its place. I think that AI has a place. I think there are great things that it can do for us, but it needs to stay in its place. Yeah. But in order for that to happen, we're going to have to establish some boundaries and reinforce them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to point out one other sort of fact of history. Political systems parallel economic systems.
All right.
And what that means is that if AI begins to do what we're talking about here, it is going to undermine any concept of democracy, and it will be replaced by technocracy.
Yeah.
In other words, a kind of socialist system is really what it boils down to. And when we're talking UBI, we're already there.
Yep, that's exactly it. Now, you're still going to have the super elite class, the people who own those companies, at least in the near term. Eventually, those people could be replaced too. But anyway, so let's wrap up this happy show. Now, to give Leibovitz credit, he was trying to say something that was encouraging. He was trying to help us to see there could be an upside.
And I hope he's right. I do think on the last point, I think there is a spiritual dimension that we do bring that does play a huge role in where the boundaries are and also pushing back against pressures. And this has always been what a proper spiritual case for anything is. And it isn't just about giving a set of doctrinal points. It is really saying this: if we don't do this,
Right.
not just is your theological vision gone, but your humanity is gone too.
Yeah.
We're at that point.
I agree. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening to this episode of the Theology Pugcast. We hope that it's been encouraging in spite of the content today.
Can I throw in the encouraging comment?
Sure.
Jesus rose from the dead.
There you go. There
And
you
he
go.
is still resurrected.
That's right. That's right. So keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that if you want to support our work, you can do it by becoming a patron. And there's a link in the show notes to our Patreon page. All right. That's enough for now. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Theology Pugcast is a ministry of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Battleground, Washington. The Theology Pugcast is produced and edited by Wiley Craft Productions of Nashville, Tennessee.